Before we do that, let us back up and review what we talked about last week, that being Ezra chapter 8, verses 15 through 23. And it's here in the verses last week, I should say, that we're shown how God prepares his people to move forward in obedience. And what do I mean by that? These are the ones in exile that have been called from Babylon to enter into a land in which they do not know, that being Jerusalem. We see here the patience of God and the love he has for his people, for he's still calling them out of exile. Now this journey, it's a short journey from Babylon to Jerusalem, right around 900 miles, 4 months. This is what they've been called to do. So we're told Ezra has gathered the returnees. They've all been gathered. And as they approach this river by Ahava, Ezra notices something. And something that stops them all in their tracks. As Ezra is taking this spiritual inventory, he notices a people who are not there, that being the Levites. Now, what does Ezra do? He knows this journey that's ahead of him. He doesn't stop and say, you know what? Let us get going, and I'll cry out for him later. Or let's just go ahead and proceed. And once we get to Jerusalem, we'll send a pigeon for him, right? And we'll bring him that way. No. He stops everything. He goes, we're not moving forward. Now, why am I harping on this? Because this is the order in which God has called Ezra. You're not moving forward without the Levites. And this is important for us today. You look at the order in which we worship. How is it that we are obedient to the Lord? We should take that very seriously. I mean, Ezra stopped everything. So here Ezra's not moving forward because the order is missing. So what does he do? He looks around at this group of at least 5,000 men, and he's surveying them. I need the Levites here. Now, he doesn't just call upon warm bodies to say, you know what, you go and find them, you go and find them, you go. No. He grabs the men who are responsible, who are knowledgeable, the very ones that God had raised up for that very moment. Ezra is taking this very seriously. So he tells them where to go to find the Levites. And again, he doesn't just send anyone, but the ones that God has raised up. So it's here. They go in. They find the Levites. The Levites hear this time, right? Because they got word that Ezra and this crew were heading out to Jerusalem. But so why didn't they automatically go? Because they were comfortable where they were. Well, you're asking us to leave Babylon? This is all we've ever known. To make this jaunt to this place that it's nowhere near as secure as this is. We got friends here. We got jobs here. And now and that's what Ezra's saying. Yeah, it's time to go. So God is even preparing their hearts, that being the Levites, for this second coming, this second calling. And it's upon that second calling that God draws the Levites. Now you can picture this. So the Levites show up. Here they are, still at the river. And they're looking at this caravan they have that's going to be traveling this 4-month jaunt, right? And there's a lot of money. I told you I'm going to touch on this in a little bit. But there's a lot of money. There's a lot of young children. And there's a lot of older folks. So of the 5,000 men, you know there's got to be one that says, hey, Ezra, where's the military that's going to be escorting us this way, right? I mean, we heard that King Artaxerxes, he said, you can take the military. They'll at least protect you. And Ezra's like, yeah, they're not going with us. And that one guy now has probably got more than just one behind him. They're like, wait, what? And Ezra's like, look, you've got to understand that before the king, I testified of God's faithfulness and that he is going to protect us. So here Ezra, he's saying, I will not speak confidently about God and then live as though God cannot be trusted. So he says, I told him we don't need the military. Now I'm sure that went over well. Nobody probably said it to Ezra's face, but you know there was some back talk going on. But Ezra says we're going to do something before we move forward. Now that we've got everyone here, including the Levites, minus the military, do you know what they do? They pray. They seek the Lord, and the Lord hears them. So this section shows us how God's work advances. Not through haste, not through human strength, but through obedience, dependence, and faithful provision. Now, how often are we guilty of not doing this, whole church? And underneath all of this, we see God providing His people with a way to come to Him rightly. And kudos to Ezra and that heart that God gave him to stop and say, we're not moving forward until we have everyone, because that's the correct order of worship. Okay. We're going to be looking at verses 24, starting in verse 24. And we're going to go all the way to verse 30. So they've got everyone together. And Ezra says this, Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their kinsmen with them. Now, this is extremely important, all right? There's a lot of responsibility that's coming with these upcoming verses. And I weighed out to them the silver and the gold and the vessels, the offering for the house of our God that the king and his counselors and his lords and all Israel there present had offered. I weighed out into their hand 650 talents of silver, and silver vessels worth 200 talents. Okay, I'm just talking about the gold here, all right? And 100 talents of gold. 100 talents of gold. Conservative estimate here. In today's money, do you know what that's worth? $190 to $220 million. I'm going to continue. And then we have the 20 bowls of gold worth 1,000 derricks. Now you may be asking, what's a derrick? It's an English name. No, I'm just kidding. So a derrick is this. A derrick was a Persian gold coin that weighed about 8.4 grams. And it was introduced underneath Darius I, hence the name a derrick. Here's another stat right here. 20 bowls of gold worth 1,000 derricks. This is just the gold. Listen to what this represents. Well over $500,000 in today's standards. That doesn't even include the silver talents and the other part of gold that was listed. And then it continues and says, and 2 vessels of fine bright bronze as precious as gold. I can only do so much math in one day, so I just stopped with the gold there, okay? But you think about this cargo that they're carrying. And I said to them, so here we have Ezra. He set out these 12 men. He goes, you're responsible for all of this. We're going to weigh it beforehand. And you're thinking, well, okay. And then we're going to weigh it once we get to Jerusalem. And I said to them, you are holy to the Lord. And the vessels are holy. And the silver and the gold are a freewill offering to the Lord, the God of your fathers. Guard them and keep them until you weigh them before the chief priest and the Levites and the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel at Jerusalem within the chambers of the house of the Lord. So the priests and the Levites took over the weight of the silver and the gold and the vessels to bring them to Jerusalem to the house of our God. No pressure. No pressure. This is holy. This is God's. This is what has been given to God. So starting in verse 24, what we're seeing Ezra selecting the 12 of the leading priests, and he sets them apart for this specific responsibility. Again, this is what they were entrusted with. The amounts involved are significant. Now, this represents years of generosity. Remember, they've been in exile, but years of generosity, sacrifice, and provision from God's people, but also the Persian authorities. This wasn't ordinary property. This wasn't just silver. It's not just bronze, not just gold. This was dedicated to the Lord and intended for His worship. Ezra doesn't treat this lightly. He doesn't hand out the treasure and say, you know what, you've got breath in your lungs, I'm going to choose you, and maybe Harry in the back. That's not what he did. This was serious. He appoints qualified men. He assigns responsibility publicly. Get that too. In front of the 5,000, you leading up to the 12, everyone knows this right here is your responsibility. We see in verse 25, it emphasizes that everything is weighed. It's not estimated. It is weighed, and nothing is left undefined. I hope we grasp this, that faithfulness before God includes every single detail. Nothing goes unchecked before God. But there's something else. Trust in God does not remove accountability. And these 12 are the perfect example. It actually deepens it. That's why in verses 26 and in 27, it spells out exactly what was entrusted to them. So we have the list of the silver, the gold, the vessels, in precise detail. Now, just the gold and silver alone, this is mind-blowing as well. Just the gold and silver. We're talking about 35 U.S. tons. Just the gold and silver. That's the weight of just that. And these are not symbolic numbers. This is literal. Now you can only imagine this enormous value that they're going to be traveling with for 4 months. And now you really got that one guy saying, are you sure we don't need the Persian army? We haven't pulled out yet, right? So by recording all this publicly, do you know what Ezra is saying? This matters with precise detail because this belongs to the Lord. The priests are not just traveling. They are carrying the very material. This material is the expression of Israel's devotion to God. This is what's sad. We do not have to look far to see why Ezra cares so much about this. In our own day, we have men like Stephen Furtick, Joel Osteen, and Judah Smith have used Christian language to build personal brands and luxury platforms. Offerings meant for the work of the gospel is flowing directly into their bank accounts. This is the issue when money given in faith is handled without meaningful accountability. And when that happens, it does not just damage a ministry, It brings reproach on Christ and confusion to believers. You don't think it's confusing to someone that their pastor drives a Bentley and has a private jet? And lives in a house of over 7,000 square feet? You don't think that's weird? You should. So again, everything's weighed, everything's recorded, everything is handled in the light because God's work is holy. And God's people deserve honesty. Now in verse 28, Ezra speaks directly to the priests. And what does he say to them? I'm reminding you, you are holy to the Lord, okay? You are holy to the Lord, and the vessels are holy. That statement right there reveals the theological heart of this section. These men are not merely transporting valuable objects. That's not what they are just doing. They are handling what belongs to God. Every time we meet, oh church, this is how we need to treat worship in reverence to the Lord. Ezra makes it clear that they are accountable first to the Lord. They are stewards of what is sacred. He then instructs them to guard these items until they are weighed again in Jerusalem. I mean, how long do you think it took to weigh that? In other words, you know what Ezra is saying? You're responsible, O priest, from start to finish. You're responsible for this. So we have here Ezra is establishing these safeguards around what belongs to the Lord. Not because he doubts their sincerity, but because he honors God. It's another reason why we push this and we push this and we push this, that you have a plurality of elders here at Christ Reformed Church to hold each other accountable. There's not a CEO. But there's also a reason why it's called a church body, so that we hold each other accountable. Faithfulness is not just about what we believe. It's about how we handle what God entrusts to us. Our time, our resources, our responsibilities, and our relationships. God is honored when his people take his word seriously. Look at verse 31. Then, okay, so after all this, right? Then we departed from the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. The hand of our God was on us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and from ambushes by the way. Wait. We're talking 900 miles, 4 months of a journey, right? With 35 tons of just gold. You've got over 5,000 people traveling. Ezra, I think you left something out. And then in verse 32, oh no, he didn't. We came to Jerusalem. And there we remained 3 days. So in verse 31, the journey finally begins, right? And you're thinking this is going to be action-packed. There's going to be a lot of detail, a lot of information. There's going to be bandits along the way. Somebody's going to blow out a wheel. And what do you do with that much tonnage? You're going to have to put an ox down? I mean, what's going to happen, right? We don't get anything. So you think about this. After all the preparation, all the prayer, all the careful planning, the people leave, set out for Jerusalem. And humanly speaking, this is the most dangerous part of the story, right? I mean, this should be the meat of it. People are aware of the risk. Nothing about this journey is safe when it comes to human standards, right? And yet, when Ezra records what happens, there's no dramatic account. We don't get any type of understanding on close calls or narrow escapes. Was there a shootout? I know. But notice something else he doesn't do. He does not portray himself as heroic or courageous. That there is no emphasis on him. But there is emphasis. Look at what he says. He simply says, the hand of our God was on us, and he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and from ambushes by the way. That's it. That's all you need to know. The hand of God was on us. We made it. There is no embellishment. There's no spotlight on human bravery. No attention to themselves. No, God kept us. But that's how we got here. He protected his people. And then verse 32 adds, well, they arrived at Jerusalem and rested for 3 days. Now that detail matters. And you're thinking, well, it should, because we just lost a big chunk of the story, right? But why does this matter? God brought them through, and then he gave them rest. He did not merely just get them there, he sustained them along the way. And this is often a problem with our Christian walk. And this is what I mean by that. This is often how God works in our very lives. We sometimes expect faithfulness to look dramatic. We imagine that if God is truly answering our prayer, there will be some sort of obvious, extraordinary sign. You know, like a cloud making a formation in the sky that's pointing us to our very next step. Or maybe I'm walking down the hallway and I knock a book off the table and it opens up this page and I pick up the book and it tells me exactly what I need to do next. And it just so happened to land on that very page. But more often, God answers prayer through quiet preservation. He keeps us, he guards us, he brings us through situations that could have gone very differently. And more often than not, we look back and we see what he has done. We don't even see it while it's happening because we're expecting an explosion. We're expecting angels to appear before us because we've been praying over this one topic, this one subject. I mean, we're down on our knees praying, but there's no voice. And no clouds are speaking to us in the sky. No book falls over. And don't look for that. I should have probably been a little bit more detailed on. Don't do that. That's not how God works. So many times we look back on something, it's like, man, I didn't even realize it at the time, but the Lord was protecting me all along the way, guiding me all along the way. That's what Ezra is describing here. This passage reminds us that faith is not proven by some type of dramatic rescue. It is proven by steady preservation. Now, I will say this, God's not always going to remove the risk. Don't think just because you pray for something doesn't mean you're going to have safe travels. He doesn't always remove the risk. But he sustains his people in the midst of it. That's what he does. And that should encourage us. Trusting God does not mean pretending that difficulties are not real. Because you're not living in the real world then. In the world in which God has created, which God has decreed, which God sustains. What it does mean, believing that God, again, is real in the midst of them, in the midst of your troubles, in the midst of your problems. He is there with you every step of the way. Ezra trusted God. The people trusted God. And God always proves faithful. Now look at verse 33. Okay, so we've jumped 4 months ahead. Here they are. They're resting for 3 days. And in verse 33, on the 4th day, within the house of our God, the silver and the gold and the vessels were weighed into the hands of Merimoth the priest, the son of Uriah, and with him was Eleazar, the son of Phinehas, and with them were the Levites, Jozabad, the son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, the son of Binnui. The whole was counted and weighed, and the weight of everything was recorded. So after this journey is complete, the people have arrived safely in Jerusalem. Verses 33 and 34, they're going to tell us what happens next, okay? And notice this. They don't immediately begin building the wall. They don't rush into celebration. They don't assume that everything is fine. They begin by accounting what was entrusted to them. That's the first thing they do after they rest. Let us make sure that everything that God has given to us, everything that God has provided, is here. It's verse 33 that tells us on the 4th day, the silver, the gold, and vessels are weighed again in the house of God. Everything that had been measured in the beginning of the journey is now being measured at the end. The same careful process is repeated. This time, again, it's being done publicly. It's being done publicly in the presence of priests and Levites in Jerusalem. If there's ever a time where you question the finances here, do you know what I want you to do? I want you to come up and grab an elder. We'll take you back to a computer and we'll say, here's everything. Right before your very eyes. This is everything that comes in. This is everything that goes out. There should never be a time where you approach an elder and you're like, hey, I've got a couple questions. The elder's like, let me get back to you. That should never happen. It should be done right away. There's nothing to hide, at least there shouldn't be. So here they are. They're weighing all this out from the priests and Levites in Jerusalem, and this is deliberate. What we see here is spiritual faithfulness. And that faithfulness includes financial and practical integrity. God's work is spiritual. We can all agree on that. God's work is spiritual. But it also involves material resources. And those resources must be handled honestly. Nothing is assumed, nothing is hidden, nothing is left unverified. Verse 34 tells us that everything is accounted for by number and by weight, and that total is recorded. Again, that detail matters. It tells us that God's work is carried out in the open. That it is done in a way that can be examined and trusted. Ezra is not content for things to be, it's probably close. What, you got a few hundred missing? Don't worry, 1,000 or 2? No, it's not that big of a deal. It's just numbers. No. Everything has to be clearly correct. Has to be transparent because this protects everyone involved. It protects the priest from false accusation. It protects the people from suspicion. And it protects the work of God from scandal. This shows us that spiritual leadership includes protecting the reputation of God's name. Carelessness in these matters do not only damage individuals, it damages the witness of God's people. You look at a scandal in the church, the world loves it. There is wisdom here for the church in every generation. Holiness does not mean avoiding structure. Spirituality does not mean avoiding accountability. The more sacred the work is, the more carefully it should be handled. Now, some people will assume that transparency shows a lack of trust. Scripture teaches the exact opposite. We see it right here. Do you know what transparency does? It honors God and it protects His people. It allows ministry to be carried out with confidence and credibility. There's no reason why the church should be suspicious. There's no reason why the church should question whether or not the elders are handling what's been given to them in a responsible manner. This reveals that faith in God does not cancel good stewardship. It produces it. Because the 12, do you know what they understood? They know they are accountable to the Lord. And they are careful before men. This is what you should expect of your elders. That the elders should be terrified to even miss a quarter when it comes to the offering, when it comes to giving. Why? Not because we're going to lose your trust, but we have to stand before the Lord. It's because they fear God, so they act honestly with His people. All right, here we go. Verse 35 and 36. At that time, those who had come from captivity, the returned exiles, offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and as a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. Do you understand how bloody that would have been? It should be. Now I want you to think about your Savior hanging on the cross. That's the fulfillment of that blood. We think of animals being sacrificed, and so on. We just see it in this sterile manner. But there is blood everywhere. There is death everywhere. And you look at this amount. 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, as a sin offering, 12 male goats. They also delivered the king's commission to the king's satraps and to the governors of the province beyond the river, and they aided the people and the house of God. After the accounting is complete and everything has been verified, verses 35 and 36 tell us what the people do next. They worship. That's what they do. They worship. They wanted to make sure that everything that they had brought, that is the Lord's, is there. And then after that, we're going to glorify the Lord for getting us here. They bring sacrifices for all Israel. This isn't just a formality. This is a confession. It's an acknowledgement that everything that they have experienced throughout that 4 months, the protection, the provision, the restoration, has come from God's hand. And before they celebrate success, they confess dependence upon the Holy of Holies. But before they even move forward with their life, they acknowledge God's mercy. They recognize that their greatest need is not for safety, nor for prosperity or stability. Their greatest need, and we see in the very first thing they do after counting, is what? They ask for forgiveness, and they fellowship with God. So worship comes first. This reminds us that true obedience always leads to worship. It's here when we see God's people recognize His grace. Their response is not pride, it is gratitude. It is thank you through and through. And then verse 36 then tells us they deliver the king's commands to the officials and governors. In other words, they live faithfully in the public sphere. They honor lawful authority. They function responsibility within society. Their faith is not hidden. Their obedience is not isolated. It shapes how they live in the world. God's grace does not withdraw His people from society. It equips them to live faithfully within it. And notice the result. They supported the house of God. So it is through all of this, the work of worship is strengthened. The life of the community is stabilized, at least for a period, and God's purpose continues. Now, let's just step back for a moment, okay? And consider everything this section has shown us. God entrusted something valuable to His people. He placed it in their hands. He called them to guard it faithfully. He brought them safely home. And in the end, not a single thing was lost. Not a single thing. Every vessel was accounted for. Every gift was preserved. Every responsibility was fulfilled. Pay close attention here. That is the faithfulness of God at work through His obedient servants. That's what we're seeing. But all this prepares us to see something far greater. Because long after Ezra, long after he's dead and gone, God would entrust something far more valuable than silver and gold. He would entrust redemption itself to His Son. Christ was sent into this world with a mission given to Him by the Father. He was sent to accomplish salvation, to guard the truth, to obey perfectly, and to bring His people safely home. And unlike every human servant, He did not fail. Nothing was lost. Nothing was compromised. Nothing was left unfinished. He finished the work He was given. And because He did, sinners can stand before God forgiven, cleansed, and accepted. So Ezra's priest guarded earthly treasure for a season. Christ guarded eternal redemption forever. This is why God hears His people. That is why worship is possible. That is why obedience matters, O church. Not because we are strong, but because Christ has been faithful. And this passage calls us to live in light of that faithfulness. Handling God's work with reverence, O believer. Walking with integrity, O believer. And trusting the Savior who has secured our salvation completely. All right. We'll end there.